Welcome back to the deep dive. Today I want to start with something that, quite honestly, drives most of us crazy.
Oh, I'm intrigued.
Repetition. You know the feeling, like a song chorus that just loops one too many times, or
Or that colleague who tells the exact same story at every single happy hour.
exactly, or just, the monotony of a task you have to do over and over again.
The broken record effect. It's actually funny because we are biologically wired to tune that stuff out.
Yeah.
The brain calls it habituation.
Habituation, right?
If the stimulus doesn't change, we just stop noticing it,
Yeah.
so we can save energy for new things.
Right, because in our culture, repetition usually signals a glitch. Like it means you're stuck. We always want the update or the refresh, the new notification. We want the timeline to scroll.
Give us the new shiny thing.
Exactly. But today, we're looking at a source that argues the exact opposite. It suggests that repetition isn't a bug in the system. It's actually the operating system for survival.
That is a really great way to frame it. Because the text we're breaking down today, Psalm 136, is arguably one of the most repetitive pieces of literature in the ancient world.
Yeah, it really is.
It doesn't just repeat a theme, it repeats a specific sentence, word for word, 26 times in a row.
26 times. I mean, even for poetry, that is aggressive.
Very aggressive.
If you turn that in as a creative writing assignment today, you'd get a C minus for, lack of vocabulary.
We absolutely would. And our mission today isn't to just read through it and say, oh, that's nice poetry.
Right.
We want to understand the actual function of that structure. So we're going to look at the King James Version of the text, alongside some pretty heavy historical context and linguistic analysis, to figure out how this ancient rhythm is actually a highly sophisticated tool for psychological and spiritual anchoring.
So we're moving from repetition is annoying to repetition is rewiring your brain.
That's the goal. And to get there, we really have to start with the setting.
Yeah.
Because you can't read Psalm 136 like a modern novel,
Yeah.
silently in a chair with a cup of tea.
No, not at all.
That completely misses the point of how it was designed to be used.
Right. Because the sources emphasize this was a responsive text. It wasn't just a solo act.
Think of it like a stadium chant, or a protest march, or even a call and response in a military cadence.
Okay, I can picture that.
You have a leader, maybe a priest or a cantor, standing before this massive crowd, and the leader shouts out the first half of the verse, which is usually a historical fact or a theological claim, something like, "To him that smote Egypt in their firstborn."
And then instead of just nodding along, thousands of people roar back the refrain together.
Yes. They aren't just listening to a sermon. They are physically participating in the storytelling.
Wow.
They're singing their history into their own bones. It creates a collective identity. When you say something in unison with 1,000 other people, it cements that truth in a way that just hearing it never could.
Let's look at that refrain, because if you're saying it 26 times, it better mean something profound. The phrase is, "For his mercy endureth forever."
It's the anchor of the entire piece. But we really need to pause here and dig into the language, because the English word mercy can be a little soft for modern ears.
Yeah, when I hear mercy, I think of a courtroom. Throw yourself on the mercy of the court. It implies you did something wrong and the judge is just deciding not to punish you. It feels like pity, like I won't hurt you this time.
That's a very Western judicial view. But the Hebrew word used here is hesed. And hesed is notoriously difficult to translate with just one English word. It's not just pity, it's closer to loyal love or steadfast allegiance.
So it's less about I won't hit you and more about I'm not going anywhere.
Precisely. It's covenantal. Think of it like a marriage vow, but on a cosmic scale. When the text says his mercy endureth forever, it's claiming that God's commitment to his creation is a structural fact of the universe, like gravity.
Wow.
It's reliable, it's stubborn, it refuses to let go.
That changes the whole vibe of the repetition, doesn't it? It's not just a chant, it's a reaffirmation of safety. It's like checking the lock on the door at night to make sure you're secure.
And that is exactly where the spiritual formation aspect comes in.
Hmm.
The sources argue that this isn't poetic excess, it's a drill.
A drill, like a fire drill.
In a sense, yes. Think about how your brain works under stress. When a crisis hits a sudden job loss, a medical diagnosis, a national tragedy, you don't rise to the occasion. You sink to the level of your training.
Oh, that's so true.
If you haven't trained your mind, you just spiral into panic.
That makes total sense. Panic is the default setting.
Exactly. So this psalm is a training regimen. By repeating his mercy endureth forever 26 times, you are literally carving a neural pathway. You are teaching your brain where to go when the lights go out.
Neurons that fire together, wire together.
Exactly.
Mhm.
The ancient writers didn't have fMRI machines, but they understood human nature. They knew that if you don't deliberately loop the truth, your brain will automatically loop the fear.
Yeah.
We are naturally prone to the negative loop. What if I fail? What if I'm alone? What if this all falls apart?
So this is an ancient hack for anxiety. You overwrite the doom loop with the mercy loop. You're jamming the signal of fear with a stronger signal of truth.
That is a perfect way to put it. Now, the structure of the psalm itself is fascinating because it doesn't just loop randomly. It takes us on a very specific journey. The sources break it down into 3 distinct movements, almost like a symphony.
Let's walk through those movements. Movement 1 is the biggest picture possible. It's God the Creator. This is verses 1 through 9.
It starts with the title Lord of Lords and immediately zooms out to the architecture of the cosmos. To him that by wisdom made the heavens, to him that stretched out the earth above the waters.
It's interesting that it specifies the celestial bodies. Verse 7 says, to him that made great lights. And then it breaks it down. The sun to rule by day, the moon and stars to rule by night.
There's a hidden polemic there. A bit of an argument with the surrounding cultures.
Yeah.
You have to remember, in the ancient Near East, the sun and moon were often worshipped as gods themselves.
Right.
They were unpredictable, terrifying deities that controlled your fate.
Right. You had to appease the sun god so he would come back tomorrow. You lived in constant fear of the elements.
But here, the psalmist demotes them. He says, no, the sun isn't a god, it's a lamp. It's a tool that this God created to serve us, to mark time. It completely strips the universe of its terror.
That's a huge shift. It turns the universe from a haunted house full of scary spirits into a structured home with the lights on.
And the refrain ties that structure to Hesed. Why is the sun rising every morning an act of mercy? Because it's reliable. You don't have to sacrifice a goat to get the sun to rise.
Yeah.
It just does, because God is faithful.
The physical stability of the universe is the proof of the moral stability of God. I really like that. It's saying, look up. Is the sun there? Okay, then God hasn't abandoned the world.
But then, just as we get comfortable looking at the stars, the psalm shifts gears violently.
Yeah, movement 2. This is verses 10 through 22. We leave the cosmos and crash land into human history, and specifically the Exodus.
Yeah, the deliverer. And notice the change in tone. We aren't talking about wisdom and great lights anymore. Now we are talking about blood and war.
It gets gritty fast. To him that smote Egypt in their firstborn. Then it says, he brought Israel out with a strong hand and with a stretched out arm.
That phrase, stretched out arm, is classic military imagery. It means sword drawn, ready to strike. It's an active, aggressive posture.
And it goes on to describe the Red Sea splitting, and then, well, this is the heavy part, but overthrew Pharaoh and his host in the Red Sea, and the crowd responds, for his mercy endureth forever.
It creates a real tension for modern readers, doesn't it?
It really does.
We hear about drowning armies and killing firstborns, and mercy is not the word that comes to mind. It feels like cognitive dissonance. How can draining people be an act of love?
How do the sources reconcile that? How is drowning an army an act of steadfast love?
You have to stand in the shoes of the people singing it. They were a slave class. They were oppressed by a totalitarian superpower that was committing genocide against their children. They were completely powerless.
So from the perspective of the slave, the defeat of the slave master is the ultimate mercy.
Exactly. Justice for the oppressor is mercy for the oppressed. You can't have one without the other. If God loves the vulnerable, he has to stand against the one making them vulnerable.
Right.
If you see a bully beating up a child, mercy toward the child means stopping the bully.
It's the mama bear aspect of Hesed. It's not soft. It's fiercely protective. It's saying, I will not let this injustice stand.
Right. And the song gets remarkably specific here. It starts naming names in verses 19 and 20.
Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan. I always stumble over those names. They sound like Dungeons and Dragons villains.
To the ancient Israelites, they basically were. These weren't just random politicians. Sihon and Og were the gatekeepers. They were the terrifying warrior kings standing between the refugees and their home.
They represent the impassable obstacle.
Yes, Og specifically was described in other texts as a giant, the last of the Rephanim. He was a monster in their collective nightmare. He was the thing that said, you will go no further.
So mentioning them by name is a form of victory chant. It's saying, remember Og, remember how impossible he seemed, remember how we thought we were all going to die in the wilderness because of him. He's gone, but God's mercy remains.
It grounds the theology and history. This isn't just God is nice, it's God showed up on that specific Tuesday when we were trapped by Og. It turns vague belief into concrete memory.
And it validates their heritage. The movement ends by saying he gave their land for a heritage. It connects the God who made the stars to the God who draws boundaries on a map for his people.
So we've gone from the cosmic creator to the warrior deliverer. But the third movement creates the biggest contrast of all. And honestly, I think this is where the psalm touches us most deeply today.
It does. It feels the most intimate. This is verses 23 through 26. God the sustainer.
The noise dies down. No more splitting seas, no more slaying kings. It gets quiet. Verse 23 says, "Who remembered us in our low estate?"
That phrase, low estate, what does that imply in the original language?
In Hebrew, it implies humiliation, being at the bottom of the heap. It could refer to their time in slavery or the exile or just the human condition of feeling small, forgotten, and vulnerable. It's the moment when you feel like you don't matter to anyone.
It's such a pivot. You go from smiting great kings, which is this high-level political action, to remembering the humiliated. And then verse 25, which might be my favorite line in the whole thing, who giveth food to all flesh?
It is a profound juxtaposition. The sources highlight this specifically. The God who has the power to dismantle an empire is the same God who ensures there is grain in the field for the cattle.
It universalizes it, too. It doesn't say who gives food to Israel. It says to all flesh. Humans, animals, everyone.
This is the theology of ordinary grace. We are addicted to the Red Sea moments, the big miracles, the fireworks, the checks in the mail that save the house at the last second. But this psalm insists that the sandwich you're going to eat for lunch today is just as much a miracle, just as much a proof of Hesed as the creation of the moon.
That's a real challenge to our perspective. We tend to think God is absent if the sea isn't splitting. But the psalmist says, did you eat today? Then he is present.
It's the recognition that maintenance is also mercy. The fact that your heart is beating right now without you telling it to beat. The fact that crops grow. The refrain holds the supernatural and the mundane together. Miracles are mercy, but so are groceries.
So we have this incredible structure: creator, deliverer, sustainer, the God of the macro, the God of history, and the God of the micro.
All held together by that one glue, Hesed, steadfast love.
Now, we always like to pivot to the so what, because reading a list of ancient geography and kings is interesting, but we want to know how it helps us navigate our world. How does this strengthen our trust and relationship with God right now?
The sources point to a few very practical applications. The first is what we might call structured gratitude.
Structured gratitude. It sounds a bit formal, like a tax return for blessings.
It's supposed to be formal. That's the point.
Yeah.
We tend to be vague with our gratitude. We say, thanks for everything, God. It's a blanket statement. It's efficient, but it's not emotionally resonant. It doesn't stick.
Right. If I told my spouse, thanks for everything, it's nice, but if I say, thanks for making coffee this morning and thanks for picking up the dry cleaning, it lands entirely differently.
Exactly. Psalm 136 is the opposite of vague. It lists the sun, it lists the moon, it lists Og, it lists the food. The application here is to get specific with your own history.
So instead of just feeling generally thankful, you actually catalog the evidence.
Yes. The advice is to list specific ways you have seen provision or protection in your own life. List the specific check that came in the mail when you were broke. List the diagnosis that came back negative. List the friend who called when you were lonely.
And after every item, you consciously pair it with the refrain.
You build your own, Psalm 136. To the one who helped me finish that project last week, for his mercy endures forever. To the one who got my kid through the semester, for his mercy endures forever.
I can see how that would build emotional resilience. You're building a resume of faithfulness. You're proving to yourself that you haven't been abandoned.
That's exactly what it is. It's a reservoir of confidence. The sources talk about anchoring during uncertainty. We live in a volatile world. The economy, politics, our own health, it fluctuates.
Tell me about it. Some days it feels like the low estate is the only estate we have.
If you anchor your well-being on the news cycle, you will be a wreck, because the news cycle is designed to be unstable. But the insight here is that stability comes from anchoring to what doesn't change. The psalm argues that God's character is the constant variable.
Mercy is not seasonal.
That's the takeaway. Whether you are in a high moment of victory, like the Exodus, or a low moment of humiliation, the fundamental reality, God's commitment to you, hasn't expired. It's the bedrock.
There's also a communal aspect this source has mentioned. We talked about how this was sung together. It wasn't just a self-help exercise.
Yes, this wasn't a private journal entry. It was public education. It It was how they taught history to the next generation.
Gid, sit down. Let me tell you about Og.
Essentially, it tells the children, this is who we are, and this is who God has been to us. It strengthens the collective identity. When you share your own stories of breakthrough with your family or your community, you aren't just bragging. You are giving them ammunition for their own battles.
You're telling them, we have been sustained before, we will be sustained again. It creates a culture of trust.
And that circles us back to the mental game, the replacing the loop concept we talked about at the beginning.
We touched on this, the idea of anxious repetition.
We all have a refrain running in the back of our minds. For many of us, it's a refrain of scarcity. There's not enough time. I'm going to mess this up. What if the market crashes? What if I get sick?
It's the background noise of modern life. It's the hum of the refrigerator, but it's anxiety.
Psalm 136 offers a model for faithful repetition. It's a deliberate choice to interrupt the anxiety loop with a truth loop. It's basically cognitive behavioral therapy, but 3,000 years older.
So you don't deny the reality. You acknowledge the reality. Yes, there is a wilderness. Yes, there are enemies like Og, but you reframe it immediately with the refrain.
You don't ignore the problem. You just subordinate the problem to the providence. You place the problem inside the context of the mercy. Og is big, but mercy endures forever.
It forces you to ask the question, what soundtrack is playing in my head? Is it a soundtrack of fear or a soundtrack of Hesed?
And the more you play the track, the more you believe the lyrics. That's the power of the repetition.
It's amazing to think that a text this old, dealing with Bronze Age warlords and ancient cosmology, is still so psychologically relevant.
Because the human context changes. We don't fight giants with swords anymore. We fight them with emails and bills and biopsy results. But the human condition doesn't change. We are still vulnerable. We still get hungry. We still feel small in the universe.
And we still need to know that we aren't alone in it.
We need to know that there is something at the bottom of it all that isn't going to give way. And the Psalm says that something is mercy.
It is not fragile. It is not temporary. It's not a mood swing.
And as the text says, it endureth forever. It's the one thing that outlasts the stars.
That is a powerful place to land. But before we wrap up this deep dive, we always want to move from information to transformation. We don't want you to just be smarter. We want you to be stronger.
Right. We want this to actually change your Tuesday.
So here is the challenge for you listening right now. We talked about structured gratitude. We talked about replacing the loop. So the question is, how will you apply this information in your life?
Will you take 10 minutes to write your own list? Maybe you sit down with a piece of paper and write my Psalm 136 at the top. Will you identify the Og and Sihon in your life right now, the big obstacles, and write the refrain next to them?
Maybe you need to change the refrain you wake up to. Instead of checking the news first thing and letting the world tell you what to be afraid of, maybe you try repeating the truth of Hesed.
Try it for a week. See if it changes the way you carry the stress of the day.
It's a small habit, but as we've seen, small repetitions can build massive strongholds.
Absolutely.
Thanks for diving deep with us today into Psalm 136.
See you on the next Deep Dive.